there's a fire in the house and it's already burned up the carport and we're into the living room, and if we get to the bedrooms, which would be April and May, then we are going to have significant. LSU Ag Center estimates up to $300 million in a hit to our state's economy, our agricultural economy, just because we don't have about 1,500 people allowed to show up and do work that nobody else will do.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Louisiana Farm Bureau podcast. I'm your host, Karl Wiggers, and today we are talking DC, talking national affairs, talking all things farm policy with our expert, Mr. Andy Brown. Expert, you probably don't like that title, do you?
I'm just another guy.
Another guy that knows a lot about a lot, in my opinion, in regards to DC life. You fresh back from a trip? I feel like how many times have you been to DC this year so far?
Just 2 in this calendar year, but it's kind of a rolling cycle. You never really know. I tell people I probably average 5 or 6 trips a year.
I feel like you've done a few trips this year, and I know I'm gonna trust your.
Yeah, that's count. Just to DC now. The travel season takes me a lot of places, yes. But we're kind of to the tail end of that. Got
you. Well, you're on the tail end of it. You just got back from a trip with the Young Farmers and Ranchers for Louisiana Farm Bureau. Now, we just talked about this before we hit record. It's your 5th or sixth trip like that.
Yeah, for the young farmer fly-in. This one's kind of one we put in ink every year in the late February, early March time frame to get. It's kind of a capstone of the leadership development process for these folks. So they learn how to do this, do days at the state capitol, other experiences. But when they've been on the committee and gotten their legs under them in terms of advocacy, then we kind of say, all right, here we go. Let's put this to the test. And it's a lot of fun. It's an annual trip and a highlight for me of my year to put them on the ground up there and watch them do their thing.
Well, and for a lot of them, it's their first time.
Yeah, it's always kind of the first initial question when we touch down is like, okay, some of y'all are repeat, maybe have come the year before. And then there's always a group that may have been to DC if, on a school trip in the 8th grade or 6th grade. But then there's some, seems every year, that have never set foot in the nation's capital. And that's really special to just kind of be there to be their tour guide.
Yeah. I know as a history guy yourself and as a guy that especially loves DC because of your many, many trips up there and time you spent up there. I've been on a trip like that with you before, and you've kind of talked about the naming of the streets and how to navigate the world up there. And I'm just like, man, Andy eats this up. So I can imagine you with some first timers up there. It's probably right up your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I always have to give a shout out to Graham and Papa Brown. My grandparents had just a small little education fund that I didn't have to use for my college degree. So I got to use that as a room and board for a summer of living in D.C. and interning. So every time I'm there, that's the best summer I never wanted to have again, but I get to have it 3 or 4 days at a time, 5 or 6 times a year. So that's just enough D.C. for me. It was cold and snowy when we got there, and I like that for about 24 hours and come on home to the boot and get back to 80 degrees. So,
humidity.
Yep.
Well, cool. Well, let's talk about that trip. So it was probably, a dozen young farmers?
14.
14 made
yep.
the trip.
Yep.
A couple staffers. You had most of your staff, most of your team.
Yeah, we had 3 of the 4 on my team, and then a few from y'all's, and then Megan Gravois as well. She kind of helps coordinate all the logistics of the trip and then does a great job helping shepherd them around and keeping them on message.
And another volunteer that was with y'all for most of the trip or some of the trip was Richard Fontenot.
We hadn't been able to always coincide it with Richard or any, Jim Harper, Ronnie Anderson being in town, but we're able to do that this year, and that adds a great piece for them to see him in action and then him to support them and tell them how important it is and show them with their own eyes that he's up there, multiple times a year and goes when there's a time of need, and that he's doing that, day in and day out on their behalf.
All right. So with the multiple staff, with a 14 is a pretty good sized group to try and get in and out of offices. Y'all divided and conquered, and y'all got to go and meet with all the different congressional staff or congressional delegates. Is that how did that go this year?
So the Hill visits, as we call them, we focus on our delegation. So 8 offices, 6 in the House, 2 in the Senate. That's when I go to schedule this thing. That's priority number 1 is how do we get in those offices? How do we maximize the member experience, member being congressional member? Can we get in to see the actual member of Congress? Certainly can't see all of them and meet with a lot of important staff, but we set that first. And then some of what I've tried to do, just my little take on it as I've taken this role on, I like to try to expose them to some other things. So we try to get off Capitol Hill and go to some agencies if we can. And then something recently, since trade and international markets are so important, I've started weaving in an embassy visit. And this year we got to go to the embassy for Canada and discuss USMCA. And so the where we go exactly fluctuates from year to year, but overall the trip has its purpose to kind of see both legislative, executive, and then all the other policy that falls beyond that.
Yeah, and it's not just business and Hill visits; it's also tours. Like I know y'all get to go visit the Capitol and see that.
Yeah, because you have some of those newbies, and I mean, it's still fun for me. I mean, I learn something new every time. Yeah, so some of it's just me walking from office to office pointing things out, but then we have some great members of Congress that will set up tours for us or different things if we put in the ask. So yeah, it's got a lot of fun to it as well.
So you mentioned sometimes you're speaking to the delegates, sometimes you're speaking to their staff, which both are very valuable and useful. Sometimes maybe staff is more useful to visit with and tell those stories. Obviously, it's nice to get face time with the delegates. How did that match up this year? How many did we get to speak to this year, delegates? And
yeah, so we were able to see 4 of our members of Congress, and everything. It's always a moving target, and for instance, 2 of our House members, Congresswoman Letlow and Congressman Carter, we had quick visits backed up to a vote, and then they had a surprise motion on the floor, and so our meetings got pushed 30 minutes beyond when we were supposed to be there. And that, with them and their offices, they have somebody dedicated full time to scheduling all this, and a surprise vote like that wrecks their day, wrecks our day. But we have great members of Congress who walked the hall with us to have the meeting as we're moving, and it can get fast paced. But that's the learning experience. It's like their time is precious, and you got to get your point across and do it respectfully and do it in respect of their time. And we were able to do that. So 4 members. One was kind of a surprise visit. Senator Kennedy was given an interview in Russell, and we walked by, and he saw us, and we saw him, and we just grabbed him, and he gave us a lot of time there in the hallway, which was really awesome too. So overall, that's I would say about par for the course to get that many. And with us having the leadership we do, Speaker Johnson and Majority Leader Scalise, very, very hard to get on their schedule. Yeah. So we're unable to do that this trip, but understand they have a little different pace than even, high-ranking senators or whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like probably also par for the course is a surprise something in the schedule where a member gets pulled off or has to push 30 minutes. That's probably also pretty par for the course, would you say?
Yeah, it's you tell them going up there, like, hey, I'm going to print you off this schedule, but keep a pen handy to scratch through and rewrite, and we'll just try to be as nimble as possible. So some meetings we had to split because the group was a little larger this year, but that's an ideal number, and we get a lot done. And then some other things popped up that were really cool, just thanks to the connections that we keep and the membership, the leadership that we have. So got a last-minute invite to go to USDA to hear this big announcement that had 2 cabinet members in the room. So Secretary Rollins and Secretary Kennedy had other White House level folks like Ben Carson and Callie Means. So a real who's who. So for those young farmers to get to go into their agency's headquarters and see the top lady and hear news about nutrition programs was a really cool experience.
That's pretty awesome. What were they unveiling? To be totally honest, I saw that was happening, but I didn't really follow. I was like, oh, that's cool. They got to go to the USDA. They got to hear an announcement. I don't even know what that was being announced.
Yeah, so it's not our typical farm program space, but we do care about nutrition programs, and this administration's trying to implement some changes to how schools implement real food is their word, and then also folks who can accept SNAP benefits, grocery stores, gas stations, other convenience stores, changing their requirements that if you're going to accept SNAP, you got to provide more what they call real food, but less processed food, more products that are, fruits and vegetables or other things that are available for SNAP purchase. So it was cool.
I was about to say, I don't think it would really matter what's being announced to be in there with that level of, cabinet members and officials. It'd be pretty neat to go and be a part of, because that you don't just stumble upon that very often.
But that's the challenge. It got scheduled at the same time as we had a meeting with Senator Cassidy, who was actually there to be in the room with our young farmers. And I hear he was a little upset that I wasn't in the room. So shout out to Senator Cassidy. Had to go visit with 2 cabinet members instead. But that's how we keep the group nimble, to make sure we're getting the message out there, giving them the experience. So only I think 4 of young farmers went with Madison and I to USDA, and then Matthew and Megan handled the Senator Cassidy meeting and divided and conquered. And both, were quality experiences.
That's very cool. So you mentioned going to the embassy, going to the USDA, we did all the Hill visits. What were some of the issues that these young farmers were sharing? Because I know every year they bring something, whether it's cattle and, chips and collars with, cattle or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
What were the issues, some of the hot issues that were talked about this year?
The first thing to point out is it's their stories. So it's what they choose that, it's affecting them. I help them, our staff helps them frame it in like what's actually moving in Washington right now. But the first thing I tell them when I send them an email before the trip is like, don't worry about these talking points I'm going to send you. You think about something that's affecting your farm. And so the first thing that seems to be consistent every year and across commodities was ag labor. Whether it was, we had quite a few South Louisiana rice and crawfish folks. We have a real hot issue on labor related to crawfish processing, but then just the general issues of having a available, affordable workforce. That was a real leading issue. And then the one experience we haven't talked about, but was top of mind as well, was a farm bill. And that was getting marked up while we were there. And that's another thing we got to go sit in the room and be there where these folks, and even me, that was a new experience for me to be in town when a committee was actively working on a farm bill. And so that was the other thing that that these young farmers led with advocacy wise in most meetings was we're 3 years beyond a farm bill and we need to see this one move, and we're supportive of what was getting marked up while we were there.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you more about labor and farm bill in a second, but any other issues that they brought up, labor, farm bill, any other stories that kind of stood out to you as you sat in the rooms with these young farmers?
Yeah, we Dylan Lasher was on the trip, was a poultry farmer, and he does a great job. It's not all, every trip that we get a contract poultry grower on the trip. So he did a great job explaining the winter storms that had just hit North Louisiana and how that had impacted them, came up with some neat policy ideas. That's what's really cool about this trip is these folks are fresh to a lot of this and just come up with genuine ideas. Sometimes these fly-ins for folks like me, like Richard Fontenot, like, the commodity committee chairman that are plugged into ag policy all the time, you feel like you can only advocate for what's already been proposed. You don't come with new ideas. Well, these young farmers aren't as trained to, we have to go through this mechanism. So they'll just come with like common sense policy ideas like, hey, I have, other commodities have disaster programs, but because I'm a contract poultry grower, I don't. And here's how I think I could have them and what I would like to see covered. So just those they're just common sense conversations were really cool to see. And then there was other, animal health, New World screwworm stuff. Trade is a huge priority. So we talked a lot about foreign competitors and things like that. So there was plenty more. It's always a hodgepodge of things, but those were the primary ones that stick out.
Before we move on talking about some of these issues and getting the national affairs update from Andy Brown, how valuable is that FaceTime that these young farmers get with the member and for the member to have with, like, it's a two-way street there. From the role that you play, from the trips you've taken, from the number of conversations you've had, after these meetings or setting these meetings up? Where do you see that greatest value?
Yeah, there's no way for me to tell the personal story that a Joe and Kaylee Arsenault came and told about. I've had to cut $40,000 of expenses somehow in my budget this crop year just to get a crop loan. I can sit there and rattle off statewide numbers about profitability, but for a young couple with a whole slew of kids at home trying to make ends meet, for them to go themselves and deliver real numbers and real impact like that, it's a different level of attention that they get than what me or Madison or Matthew or Annie would get just going in there on our own. So it's, we talk about it all the time, but it's real when you get to see it with your own eyes. And then that's what keeps them coming back. It's been rewarding for me to see this group grow. We've had a lot of enthusiasm for our Young Farmer program, particularly through this trip. And so for them to see it as well, I can see it in the eyes of the congressmen that they visit with, the staffers that they're educating, but then also our young farmers that say, wow, I do get to go be heard and be seen. And I can't help but point out just the patriot in me. Very few other governments in the world, people can talk about how divided we are, how tough things are politically in America right now. But all it takes is walking through a metal detector and scheduling a meeting like you're going to see your doctor, and you can go see the third most powerful man in the country and Mike Johnson, on any given trip. So that's something unique to America, and it doesn't get pointed out enough. But for a guy like me that gets to go do it, I always try to point that out to our young farmers and point that out to this audience that is rare. I've seen people from other countries walk in, these house office buildings in tears because in their home country, they would never, be able to be in the same building as an elected official, let alone sit on a couch next to one.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Man, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah, I've literally seen, I vividly remember, I'm not sure what country in Africa, but an African gentleman just like weeping, going in like, this is freedom that I've never experienced. And we take it for granted, but it's special.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty nuts to think about, that thing that we take for granted. And we probably, I'm sure you're not the only one that reminds people from time to time. I'm sure the congressional members also have that yeah, this is special.
Yeah, they all tell these young farmers and the staffers, they all are like, thank you. We lead with a thank you when we go in. Thank you, Senator Cassidy, for sponsoring this or that. And usually the response is, no, thank you. Not everybody takes the time to do this. We know y'all are business owners. We know, and people can call that political speak if they want. I'm the guy that's in the room on all these trips, and I'm telling you it's real, and they do appreciate it, and it does matter.
Well, and also for that member, it's now they have a connection with Joe and Kaylee.
Yeah.
Not this fiction, not potentially fictional Joe and Kaylee that Andy put on a piece of paper and told me the story about.
Yep, and that's
it takes you out of the equation. It connects them directly, and I think that's valuable.
That's why we're the conduit. Why I'm not a full-time lobbyist. Once I make that connection, I'm happy to step back in and facilitate and clear things up procedurally, or research law. But a lot of our executive committee have relationships with members and or staffers that may contact them directly, and that's fine. We like to be in the loop so we know what's being talked, and they do a great job of that. But there's nothing like grassroots, and this is where that comes.
Mm-hmm.
That rubber meets the road.
Yeah, probably carries a little bit more weight coming from that member who's got the $40,000 they've had to find in their budget.
That's right. But you and I get in our feels about the grassroots, so we got to move on.
All right.
I think. But
let's talk about some of the major issues that you've been following from a national affairs standpoint. We've touched on Farm Bill 2.0, labor. Real quick, bring me up to speed on what's going on with labor and what you've been seeing with crawfish.
Yeah, so just high level, we're in Louisiana with commodities. We have how perishable they are, the seasonality of them. We are very high users of our guest worker programs, H-2A and H-2B. Well, most agricultural jobs fall in H-2A, but according to agencies that administer these programs, there are certain jobs that fall under a different program that's called H-2B. It's a manufacturing program, guest worker program, more than ag. But according to attorneys in D.C., when you take a crawfish and you pull its head off of its tail and then you pull the shell off of that tail meat, that's processing. That's not farming. So the problem, just to try to be as brief as possible, is that H-2B program is capped. They only allow so many, 66,000 guest workers
in the country.
For all job types that fall under H-2B. So there's hotel workers in there, like hospitality. There's landscaping. There's other manufacturing type jobs that can qualify. And so a few things in agriculture, seafood processing being one, fall into this pool. Some of our sugar mill workers.
I was about to say mill workers, would that fall in?
Yep, they do. But it's a very fine line, hard to define quickly. So I'll just say primarily our problem here in the last few months has been for our crawfish folks. And the processors, a lot of them are also farmers. Some of them are not. But ultimately, like any commodity, if you don't have a market, you don't have value. And so we have a real threat due to the lack of labor that has been administered through this program this year and the way it's been administered, that our crawfish season is really in threat. The supply is picking up, and that's great, and the live market and the live price is still good. But as we get into April and May, the processing side of crawfish for peelers, for whole boil, becomes of much greater value, and it's necessary to get the full value of that supply chain. So it's a federal issue. We've had a lot of state support, had a lot of people involved, Commissioner Strain, the governor, Rhonda Butler, the list goes on. But ultimately, me as our national affairs director have had to take a hands-on approach in trying to get something changed about how many visas, guest worker visas, are available, and also when they're available, because crawfish season is here and we don't have the workers we need. So
real quick, we don't have a ton of time to go into this, but is that number lower than normal, that cap number lower, or is it filled earlier? What's kind of the... We always blow through the cap in about 3 to 5 days.
Okay. That happened. And then what we end up doing, this is just government and why they, our farmers pay guys like me, is to deal with ridiculous things like this. But program cap is what it is. It gets met in a few days, and then we have to beg and plead for supplemental visas beyond that. That's where the problem lies this year. They gave an additional 64,000 visas above the 66. That's still oversubscribed. We have way more applicants for those 64,000 than are going to get them. But also then really with the problem lied in two things. Number one, we've had 2 government shutdowns of the lead agency for this, Department of Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. So that's caused a huge backup and confusion and can't get proper guidance. But then DHS and Department of Labor, they joint administer this program, also changed the game this year. They changed the rules on how they rolled out these supplemental visas, and it caused a ton of confusion and created where a whole quarter of the year, end of 2025, applicants in that window have just been left out in the cold altogether. So it's complicated. Ultimately, just to summarize it, though, this is actually President Fontenot's analogy. We know that there's a fire in the house and it's already burned up the carport and we're into the living room. And if we get to the bedrooms, which would be April and May, then we are going to have significant, LSU Ag Center estimates up to $300 million in a hit to our state's economy, our agricultural economy, just because we don't have about 1,500 people allowed to show up and do work that nobody else will do.
That's pretty wild to think about. So we're working on that still. I'm assuming you're
night and day. Wagasback and I, and then our whole leadership team. And then, like I say, every elected official we can get a hold of has been helpful and working, but just haven't found resolution yet.
Cool. Well, another issue that we've talked about a lot, I feel like probably for the last, I don't know, I've been working here for 10 years, so about 10 years, it's been Farm Bill.
You never don't talk about Farm Bill at Farm Bureau, but this one has been a much longer challenge than previous.
Seems like it's become quite the marathon here, but we're in 2.0 range now. Give me the 2-minute version of where we're at with the Farm Bill now.
Yep. So we had a bill in 2024 that got to where we are in 2026 with this current bill, which is the House Ag Committee released a bill. They, quote, marked it up, which means they allowed for amendments and debate within the Ag Committee. Mm-hmm. And then they, last week while we were there, passed that out of committee. So that's just one of 5 overall steps that a bill has to take. So it still has to get passed in the full House. It has to be worked in the Senate Ag Committee and passed in the Senate. And then if those bills align, the president could sign it. So we're a long way from the finish line, but it is a very, very important first step and one that's very exciting because we have a lot of Louisiana priorities in it. So the Farm, Food, and National Security Act of 2026, aka Farm Bill 2.0, is moving and is moving favorably in the eyes of Louisiana farmers and has a lot of good to it that would really help our producers.
Without doing an exhaustive Farm Bill podcast here, what are some of those priorities that have made it in that we've talked about over the last few years of needs and shortfalls or gaps that need to be filled in a new Farm Bill?
Yeah, I'll first just say quickly that we celebrated a lot of things in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act reconciliation last summer. It did a lot of Farm Bill things that would normally have been what I just answered that question with: reference prices, loan rates, et cetera, et cetera. This bill is more the technical bill. It's not one it's budget neutral, so we're not increasing spending in a lot of programs. If we increase spending, we had to find cost cuts, reductions in some other part of the bill. But what it really does, and where guys like me make our living, is within the programs that get funded, how do we make them better? So improvements to conservation programs, expanding and updating those, expanding credit opportunities, loans, government-backed loans, farm credit loans, making those more available to young farmers is a real highlight of this deal. And then other supporting things like trade promotion, investments in research. The LSU Ag Center can really find some big wins in this bill. That's the high-level stuff. The part I'm super excited about is to say that we have 3 bills, marker bills, that Congresswoman Letlow offered, pieces of those that were direct from Farm Bureau, commodity advisory committees that we carried to her. She put in legislation, and then that was adopted by the Ag Committee. 3 of those are in black and white in this bill. We added an amendment to make one better because it's been updated since the last time they took a swing at this. And then we'll have some additional just report language that helps direct the agency. So really, overall, 4 key issues direct from a Louisiana Farm Bureau member are in this bill, and we're going to push like crazy to get it done.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work that's been done on that. I know for the past few years in those committee levels on the advisory committees, to see it now in black and white, I'm sure, for even if just to get it to where it is now, I'm sure you're very proud about that, right?
Yeah, and that circles all the way back to these young farmer trips where these common sense ideas come about. Everybody thinks they have to be a wordsmith or a lobbyist. They don't. They got to show up with a problem. And then where we hang our hat is we don't just yell the problem. We offer a solution, and we have staff that help craft that solution, and then we work it until it's to fruition. So we're not to fruition yet. We're not celebrating just yet, but it is very rewarding to see. And this had to get carried from members of other states and from the chairman from Pennsylvania. It just shows our network and how we utilize that and advocate.
Yeah, just shows the value of being part of the Farm Bureau family and engaged, not just a member, but an engaged member. And I think that's really cool to see. see that pay off and see that
100%.
being used all the way up in DC, and it's going to come back and help folks here on the ground at the grassroots level. So very cool. Andy Brown, thank you so much for coming and talking about all things DC. I know we could talk for an hour more probably about all some of the issues that you're following, but we will have Andy on again, hopefully with some more updates on some of these issues we're talking about, and positive updates, ideally. So thanks, Andy Brown.
I'll throw one thing out. I don't know if I'll be on a podcast again before the primaries for our election, but we're in a midterm election year. So as your national affairs guy, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I will remind you it's very important to get out and vote and exercise that. So all this, is dependent on those that we elect. So get out in April and cast your vote.
Very good. Thank you, Andy Brown. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We hope to see you again right here on the Louisiana Farm Bureau podcast next time.